This album doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explain what it is, and it doesn't tell you how to listen. It simply starts. There is no opening gesture meant to guide you, no framing device to prepare you. It begins as if the music was already there before you pressed play, and will continue long after you will leave it behind. Slow Delivery was released in 1994 by a band called The Keepers, a band that never positioned itself, never framed its sound, and never made a case for attention. There was no attempt to define an identity, no effort to signal importance. Because of that, the album feels strangely detached from time. Not old, not nostalgic, just separate. And that separation matters because it tells you how this record wants to exist. It does not ask to be placed. It does not ask to be understood quickly. By the mid-90s, blues had already been divided into roles. Some of it was modernized, shaped to fit contemporary production and taste. Some of it was preserved, packaged carefully as heritage. Some of it was framed as a revival. Slow Delivery does none of that. It doesn't modernize the blues. It doesn't romanticize it, and it doesn't react to it. It feels like an album made outside of conversation, not in opposition to anything, just elsewhere. And albums that exist elsewhere are often the easiest to overlook. The word slow is often misunderstood. In this album, slow does not mean lacking energy. It does not mean fragile or tentative. It means unhurried. Nothing here feels delayed and nothing feels dragged. The pacing feels settled, as if the music has already decided that there's nowhere it needs to go. That creates a quiet tension because most records promise progress. They move you forward. They reward patience with arrival. This album does not. It stays where it is, and it asks you to decide whether you're willing to stay with it. One of the first things you notice is space. Not empty space, but lived-in space. You hear room. You hear distance. You hear instruments allowed to finish their thoughts without being cut short or corrected. Nothing feels pushed. Nothing feels sculpted into a statement. The sound doesn't try to surround you or pull you in. It sits beside you, and that choice changes everything, because now you're not consuming the music, you're sharing space with it. There is emotion here, but it isn't presented. This is blues without performance. There is no raised voice, no dramatic collapse, no moment that asks to be noticed. The feeling lives underneath the surface, steady and unresolved. It feels closer to real emotional life, not moments but conditions, not events but states. This music doesn't tell you how to feel. It doesn't guide you toward meaning. It allows feeling to exist without naming it, and that restraint gives it weight. Even without knowing its history, Slow Delivery feels private. Not secretive, not hidden, but private in the sense that it doesn't reach outward. It feels like something recorded because it needed to be recorded, not because it needed to be heard. That difference is subtle but profound. It explains why the album doesn't explain itself and why it doesn't translate itself for the listener. It assumes patience, it assumes time, and it assumes that the listener is willing to meet it halfway. Most albums justify their length with peaks. They build, they escalate, they resolve. They tell you where to pay attention. This one doesn't. There are no climaxes here, no emotional high points, no cues that tell you this matters more than the rest. Everything carries equal weight. At first, that evenness can feel disorienting, even frustrating, but over time, it becomes grounding. Nothing is asking for priority. Nothing is competing for meaning. Because of that, listening to this album becomes less about anticipation and more about presence. You stop waiting for something to happen. You stop measuring progress.
You begin to listen differently, not for moments, but for continuity, not for statements, but for atmosphere. And once that shift happens, the album opens up in a quiet way. This album didn't fail because it lacked quality. It failed because it didn't fit a moment. It was too calm for urgency-driven markets, too restrained for revival scenes, and too quiet for branding. There was no story to attach it to, no angle that made it easy to explain, so it passed through time without friction. And records like that don't disappear. They wait. They remain available, unclaimed by trends. When slow delivery ends, there is no sense of completion. You don't feel finished and you don't feel changed. There is no resolution offered, no lesson delivered. Instead, you feel returned to a neutral state, returned to stillness. The album doesn't leave you with ideas. It leaves you with a condition, a slowed internal pace, a quieter sense of time moving. And that may be its most enduring quality. This is not an album that asks for interpretation. It doesn't want to be decoded or reevaluated. It doesn't insist on importance. It simply holds a space that most music refuses to hold anymore. A space without urgency, without performance, without demand. If you stayed with this album until the end, it wasn't because it convinced you of something. It wasn't because it impressed you. It was because it allowed you to remain. And in a culture that constantly pulls you forward, that ability to remain is not insignificant. It is rare.